This is a poem called Waterfall by Lauris Edmond, who was a New Zealand poet who wrote a lot about the passing of time in her poetry. And one of the reasons for this, critics say, is because she didn't become a poet until quite late on in her life, because she followed around her husband's career and didn't actually study creative writing until she was in her, when she was middle-aged, and she didn't have her first poetry published until she was 51. And this idea of time passing and reflecting on the past is very much reflected in this poem. So the first thing to draw your attention to are these two semantic fields that occur throughout the poem. The first one being time. There are lots of words associated with time, such as youth, delay, time itself, and then later we get the words fast and once, which are also words that we can associate with time. The second one is that it's interesting to observe how light is at play throughout the poem. At the start we get this kind of lighter imagery of glinting minutes and sunlight. Then in the second stanza we get darkly and darkness, and then in the final stanza we get both. We get this light luminous imagery, and then we also get the word dark, and so there's a contrast at play there. And so the first thing to think about is the fact that this whole poem is an extended metaphor for the passing of time itself. So it's time, or we might say life. So it's important as you are reading this poem to think about the way that a metaphor or the metaphor of a waterfall might reflect the way that time passes. It only goes in one direction. It kind of glints in the sun, as is said in the second stanza. It's something that's beautiful, but it's also something that's fast, and something that is, as it says in the first stanza, irreversible. And this whole image is something that Lauris Edmond plays with throughout the poem. So firstly, if we just read the first stanza, she says, "I do not ask for youth nor for delay in the rising of time's irreversible river that takes the jewelled arc of the waterfall in which I glimpse, minute by glinting minute, all that I have and all I am always losing as sunlight lights each drop, fast, fast falling." The first thing to note is that it is written in the first person, so it is a deeply personal poem. We get this sense that the poetic voice is reflecting on their past, and that they are thinking about the life that they've had. And we get this sense coming through that clearly it is not a youthful person, because they are saying they do not ask for youth. So we can assume that this person is already past the stage of their youth, and they're an older person that is looking back at their life later on. Also, in this first stanza, we get the negation of not and nor. Now, there is a clear sense of a quite kind of confident poetic voice here, and I think that the negation, which is the not or nor, kind of creates quite a matter-of-fact tone and an accepting tone. So we get this sense that this person, they are not kind of regretful or nostalgic about their youth, but they are very accepting of the passing of time, and they are not looking for a kind of reversal to go back to the time that they were. Now in this second line, we get the rising of time's irreversible river. Now this word irreversible is very important because it evokes the idea of aging. Okay, so not only are we talking about the passing of time, but we are talking about this the idea of aging, and how when people grow up they can't become young again, and the poetic voice is certainly very accepting of this notion. Now in this this third line that takes the jewelled arc of the waterfall, the jewelled arc of the waterfall suggests value and that something is precious. Now, it's a very kind of vivid image here. It is talking about the way that the light plays on the waterfall. And this here seems to be a metaphor for the way that, despite the fact that life is transitory and memories themselves are transitory, there is nonetheless something valuable and precious within it. So here, this imagery is inviting us to look at the past and look for the way that it is beautiful. And now, as we move on, we get this real sense of a fast pace. Okay, so I could have even highlighted the word glimpse, because she says, I glimpse minute by glinting minute. And this fast pace is not only reflected in the fact that the minutes seem to be going by quite fast, but the repetition of minute itself creates this sense of these words kind of falling into each other. And that is indeed kind of reflected in the final line, where fast falling, the repetition of fast here feels as though the words are kind of falling into each other like water does on a waterfall itself. And so she goes on to say, all that I have and all I am always losing, as sunlight lights each drop fast falling. Now, it's curious here that she says all that she has and all that she is losing, because she is not suggesting that she is sad about what she loses. There isn't any kind of sadness really in this stanza, but rather, as I said at the beginning, she is accepting. Okay, and here she says she evokes this very kind of positive, bright image of sunlight lighting each drop. Okay, so we get this bright, positive imagery. Now, what I always say to my students is that tone is really something that unlocks the meaning in a poem. And so if you can kind of hinge your analysis on this idea that there's a fairly matter-of-fact or accepting tone, which suggests that she's not sad about the passing of time, and indeed evoke something more positive, then I think you're really going to kind of raise the sophistication of your analysis of this particular poem. Now, in this second stanza, what's interesting is that we get the addition of another person in the poem. Now, it is unclear who this person is, but we can assume it is a former lover or her husband. And this is where the context of Lauris Edmond's life can give you some help with interpreting the poem. Lauris Edmond, when she started studying creative writing, when she was in her middle-aged years, she started having affairs with some of her professors, which were fairly well documented, and she never split from her husband. But some people might read this as her talking about the people that she had these affairs with, or it could be the kind of early years of her burgeoning love with her husband. So there are two kind of ideas that I will leave open to your interpretation. And if you're wanting to kind of get those higher marks, being able to talk about these two different interpretations might be one way of showing the examiner that you are really thinking about the kind of multiple layers of meaning within this poem. And another thing which is interesting about this first line, she says, I do not dream that you, young again, might come to me darkly in love's green darkness. The word dream itself shows that we are kind of entering a more kind of fantastical realm, or something that is kind of unreal, as she is looking at the past. And that's fantastic in the sense that it's like a fantasy rather than fantastic in meaning good. So she says, I do not dream that you, young again, we get this time, semantic field of time. You, young again, might come to me darkly in love's green darkness. Now it's curious here that she repeats the root dark that is in both of these words. So we get this repetition. Now, dark might suggest that she's talking about something illicit or something that is not certainly not as positive as the images that are evoked in the first stanza with the sunlight and the light. And so we get this sense that something there's something kind of going on that she's not meant to be doing, perhaps. And indeed, darkly kind of brings up this kind of erotic time frame of nighttime, which is where people are usually kind of courting each other. Now, in this second stanza, we get this addition of a second person, which is implicated in the pronoun you. Now, Lauris Edmond is clearly intentionally ambiguous about who this person might be, but we can assume that it is some kind of former lover. Now, from Lauris Edmond's biography, we know that when she started kind of studying creative writing and writing more poetry, she began having affairs with her professors that she was studying with. So we can maybe imagine that it is some of her former lovers in some ways, or perhaps the more likely reading is that it is the past memory of her relationship with her husband, perhaps when it was in a more kind of passionate stage. And this is kind of becomes more evident when we read the third stanza. Now, those kind of two different interpretations of who that you might be an opportunity for you to show two different readings of the same stanza. And if you're looking to get kind of higher marks where you're expanding your analysis and discussing your personal response to the poem, that might be one way in which you can get multiple interpretations into an essay. But if we look even closer and look at this word dream, this is a seemingly simple word, but actually kind of evokes the atmosphere that we are about to enter as we read on into the poem. And dream has all these connotations of fantasy and something that is unreal. And so the whole kind of lens of this stanza is through this idea of this kind of dreamlike state of being. And indeed, as we move on, the language builds this idea that this is almost filtered through some kind of hazy fantasy, a kind of evocation of the past. So she says, I do not dream that you, young again, might come to me darkly in love's green darkness. So the root of dark is repeated again. Now, we might think that there is something illicit going on, or perhaps she is kind of evoking the time when her and her lover would consummate their love and would essentially be having sexual relations with each other. So either it could be to do with the time of day, which is nighttime, or it could be evoking something that's a little more illicit, or something that she almost shouldn't be doing, as if something's being done in secret. And that is up to you, what interpretation you decide to read into this particular stanza. And if we carry on, she says, where the dust of the bracken spices the air, moss, crushed, gives out an astringent sweetness, and water holds our reflection motionless as if forever. Now, the key thing about this particular stanza is that it's very, very rich in imagery. And not just visual imagery, but we also get these smells that are coming through in the bracken spices and astringent sweetness. And what we call this when a poet decides to kind of mix the senses in one particular image, we call it synesthesia, which is always difficult to remember how to spell, so please do note the spelling there. And what we get are these very kind of powerful sensory images, which shows that this particular memory is very powerfully kind of ingrained in the poetic voice's mind. And in particular, what might suggest that it is perhaps to do with sexual relations is that there is kind of undertones of eroticism, and this subclause here, crushed, might suggest that the moss is almost being kind of crushed under the couple as they are kind of potentially making out in nature. So we've got this natural imagery with erotic undertones. Okay, and it is clearly a very kind of passionate stanza. So we've kind of gone from this fairly matter-of-fact tone to this opening, which is fairly matter-of-fact. I do not dream that you, young again, might come to me darkly in love's green darkness. And we get all this more vivid imagery and more powerful vocabulary coming through in this particular stanza. And again, there isn't an ambiguity here. So if we look at the oxymoron here, astringent sweetness. This oxymoron suggests that perhaps their memory isn't all good. It suggests that it's perhaps bittersweet. And here we get to see perhaps the truth of memory coming through. This oxymoron suggests that memory is not always good, and that actually the kind of the memory of this is something that gives the poetic voice a sense of bitterness, as well as something that's very passionate and something that she's fond of. And then finally, this ends in a kind of shorter line where she says, and water holds our reflections motionless as if forever. Now, it's very easy to look at the words motionless and forever and see that, oh, wow, she's suggesting that the memory is kind of preserved in time, it's frozen, and it's preserved in some way. But she is very careful to write the words as if forever. So although we get the sense that this poetic voice is wanting to hold on to this particular memory, that she is looking at it in the waterfall, which is the metaphor for the passing of time. She's looking at this memory and trying to hold on to it. She is also conscious of the fact that it's only as if forever. Okay, so although there is this this hope perhaps, or this passion, there is still a sense of realism. Okay, there's a tone of realism that just about kind of glints through the poem here. Now, if we look at the third stanza, we notice that there is a strong shift from the first two. And the first is that we get the shift from the past, the memory in the second stanza, to the present. So there's a shift in tense. The second thing is that there is much more simple vocabulary and a distinct lack of imagery. She doesn't describe the room, and indeed she doesn't really describe her feelings at what she is describing. What she does do, however, is she seems to list many of the qualities of a relationship. Okay? So we have kindness, love, trustful, judgment, and all of these seems to be some kind of quality that you might find in perhaps a thriving relationship, or more so in this one, a kind of long-living relationship, one that is lasting a long time. So if we read it through, she says, "It is enough now to come into a room and find the kindness we have for each other, calling it love." Now this here with the dashes is really important, and it might seem that love is the most important word in this line, but actually I think the fact that she says calling it love, it suggests that love has taken on a different kind of quality or guise. So what I mean by that is that she is acknowledging that love is different to what it was in the past. In the past, it was this passionate, kind of a lustful affair, which was very, very vivid. But now we are in the present, and this whole stanza is kind of characterized by ordinariness. And that could be the ordinariness of language, of the imagery, and just of the memory and the relationship itself. So she says, calling it love in eyes that are shrewd, but trustful still, face chastened by years of careful judgment, to sit in the afternoons in mild conversation without nostalgia. So throughout this, she's describing the relationship. Now we can assume it is between her and her husband, which is clearly it's lost its previous passion, and this idea that the face is chastened by years. Chastened means kind of rebuked in some way, or kind of told off. Suggests that there has been some not so good moments in this relationship, to put it lightly. Perhaps there have been arguments, perhaps there have been disagreements, but she acknowledges that the years of a relationship can take its toll, and the fact that the face is chastened almost suggests that it's being worn down by years of this careful judgment. And again, so we get this kind of this caesure in the middle, this semicolon, and then this very simple image of them sitting in the afternoons in mild conversation without nostalgia. Again, this is a real image of the ordinariness of their relationship. It is no longer passionate, and in fact, the adjective mild almost suggests that the kind of temperature or the temperament of their relationship has got weaker, or sort of less passionate. Okay, and it's worth noting that in this stanza she talks about their conversation, whereas the one before is more of this kind of lustful act of consummating their love. And then finally, if we look at this final bit, she says without nostalgia. Okay, so that she is nostalgia is quite a positive idea. It suggests that she, if someone looks at something with nostalgia, it suggests they're looking at it with a kind of positive or sweet lens. But here, there is nothing sweet. There's nothing sweet about the relationship. Nothing sweet. She is like, no, there are no delusions. Okay. So it seems like we get this return to a matter of fact tone. The whole sense of this stanza is that it is what it is. There isn't much more to say about the relationship. Now, if we look at this final stanza, we get another shift in a way. So we get but, which indicates some kind of pivot. So we know that this stanza already is going to be a contrast from the one before. And there seems to be almost a sense of desperation and a kind of return to a fast pace that kind of undercuts the kind of slowness and the ordinariness of the stanza before it. She says, but when you leave me with your jointiness sinewed by resolution more than strength, suddenly then I love you with a quick intensity, remembering that water, however luminous and grand, falls fast and only once to the dark pool below. So whereas before we had this simplicity and a kind of lack of imagery, now we have this return to, again, this fast pace and more vivid imagery. So when she says, "But when you leave me," this is ambiguous in that it could be as serious as talking about her husband's death, okay? And by the end of the stanza, it becomes clear that that is something that is on her mind, with the dark pool below being a kind of metaphor for death. A very clear one there. Or it could be as simple as when her husband leaves her. Now, it's up to you which of those interpretations it is. Perhaps, given the metaphor of death that is evident at the end, it could be more to do with death. But equally, what is interesting is that we get this reminder of her husband's jauntiness, which kind of means cheerfulness, okay, and positivity, which is sinewed or strengthened by resolution more than strength. Now, resolution is a curious choice here because it could indicate sort of resolved conflict, or it could also mean kind of decisiveness. Okay, that her husband is more decisive, perhaps, than she is. And then another thing to note here is that we get this return to pace. There is a fast pace evident in this stanza. She says suddenly, quick, later we get fast. Okay, so all of these words are related to the semantic field of time and evoke a sense of pace. And that is why we might think that there is more of a desperation here. Whereas at the start, there is an acceptance. Here, as she starts to realize what the reality of her husband leaving might be, we get this real sense of transience. Okay, so transience means fleeting, something that is over very quickly. And so she is suddenly waking up to how transient life can be. And she says, "Suddenly then I love you with a quick intensity," because she is acknowledging, she realizes that her husband might be leaving her. She looks to the future when that might happen. And then I love you with a quick intensity, remembering that water. So here we have remembering. Okay, so this is kind of what this is all about, a kind of important word throughout the poem. She says, remembering that water, however luminous and grand, so water, thinking about here how the extended metaphor of a waterfall is for life itself and the passing of time. She remembers that water, however luminous and grand. So it doesn't matter how great or let's say kind of valuable it is. She's saying it doesn't matter how great life is or how great the memory is. Life will fall fast and only once to the dark pool below. Okay, so suddenly we wonder if her earlier acceptance is now perhaps more a desperation or a sudden realization of what death might mean. And this is certainly reflected in the fast pace, the kind of darkness of the pool below. So whereas at the start we got this sunlight lighting her memories, now she is suddenly perhaps, she's more desperate. Okay, more desperate and perhaps comes to a realization about the reality of death. And then a final thing to notice is the form of this poem. So we've got these 4 stanzas, and structurally there is a lot you can say about it. But another thing to note, so where here I've said there is a fast pace, this is also reflected in the enjambment throughout the poem. Okay, Now, this enjambment itself is a reflection of the waterfall metaphor. Okay, the waterfall falls fast. It only flows in one direction, and the enjambment is certainly reflecting that. And so, if you are analysing this poem, you might want to consider how the enjambment throughout the poem creates this sense of inevitability, of pace, and which in turn kind of reflects the transience or fleeting nature of life itself. And another thing that is worth noting about the form is the way that obviously there is an irregular rhyme scheme with a couple of flashes perhaps of rhyme, such as in darkness and sweetness. But what is more noteworthy is the way that there are what we call downbeats at the end of a lot of the stanzas. So if we look at this first stanza, the first one is iambic pentameter. Okay, so the delay, the stress is on the second syllable delay, and then on the subsequent lines we have this downbeat: river, waterfall, minute, losing, falling, where the downbeat is on the second syllable. And this downbeat is kind of reflecting again the way that the waterfall might be falling on the rocks, and perhaps the downbeat also is reflecting the unpredictability of life. Okay, so it reflects the waterfall and the unpredictability of life. And so if you are looking to really get those top marks and talk about the way that the form reflects the content, that might be one route into talking about it.